Hello everyone. Before we start, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel and leave a comment with where you're from and what time you're watching. That way, YouTube will keep showing you stories just like this one. Now, let's begin. My name's Frank, and after 41 years of hauling freight across every highway in America, I was 3 days away from retirement. 3 more runs, then I'd turn in my keys for good. That October night, I was pushing east through Kansas with a load of produce when the weather turned mean. Rain came down like bullets, and the wind tried to shove my trailer into the ditch. When I saw the exit sign for a little town called Millfield, I took it without thinking twice. The only place open was a diner called Betty's 24-hour. Half the neon was dead, and what was left buzzed like angry wasps. I parked under the one working light and made a run for the door, rain soaking through my jacket before I'd gone 10 steps. Inside, it smelled like coffee, bacon grease, and that particular staleness of a place that's been serving the same food for 30 years. 5 people sat scattered around, 3 farmers in seed caps, a woman with weathered hands wrapped around a coffee cup, and a kid in a Letterman jacket who kept glancing at me like I was interrupting something. The waitress had red hair going gray and tired eyes. She poured coffee without being asked, the kind that's strong enough to wake the dead. "Storm's got the interstate flooded ahead," she said. "You'll be here a while." "That's fine," I said. "Just need some food and a place to wait it out." She nodded toward the menu board. "Pancakes are good, fresh made." While I waited for my food, I noticed the bulletin board by the register. The usual small-town stuff, church suppers, yard sales, and a few missing person flyers. One caught my eye because of the location. A trucker named Mark Daniels, last seen at a roadside diner off I-70. The photo showed a guy about my age, wearing the same kind of ball cap I had in my truck. The waitress brought my pancakes and slid a napkin under my fork. Her hands shook just enough to notice. When I looked down, there was writing on the napkin in blue ink. "Don't park behind the building." I looked up, but she'd already moved away. The farmer in the corner booth was stirring his coffee with a spoon, making slow, deliberate clinks against the mug. The kid in the jacket was watching my reflection in the pie case glass. Nobody was talking, but the silence felt heavy, like everyone was waiting for something. "Storm should break soon," the waitress said when she came back with more coffee. "If you're just passing through, stay under the lights out front. Don't go past the dumpsters." I wanted to ask why, but something in her voice told me not to push it. When I paid my bill, the receipt had their logo stamped on it, Betty's Diner with a little cartoon coffee cup. But underneath, someone had written in the same blue ink, "Thanks for stopping by again." Again. I'd never been to this place before in my life. Back outside, the rain had eased to a drizzle, but the wind still howled through the power lines overhead. I climbed into my cab and sat there, engine idling, watching the diner through my windshield. The people inside looked normal enough, but something about the whole situation felt wrong. Like a play where everyone knew their lines, except me. That's when I heard the tapping on my trailer. Not the random banging of loose chains or shifting cargo. This was deliberate. Tap, tap, tap. Pause. Tap, tap, tap. Like someone knocking on a door. I grabbed my flashlight and climbed out, my boots splashing in the puddles. The lot was empty except for my rig and an old sedan parked way back by the dumpsters. I walked along the side of my trailer, listening. The tapping had stopped. When I reached the back doors, I checked my seals. Everything looked normal, but there, in the mud beside my rear wheels, were footprints, fresh ones, still filling with rainwater. They led from the dumpster area right up to my trailer, then just stopped, like whoever made them had vanished into thin air. My CB crackled to life. "Breaker 19, this is Road Dog. You copy?" I grabbed the mic. "Yeah, I copy. Go ahead. Just wanted to let you know. There's been reports of folks going missing along this stretch. Truckers mostly. You be careful out there. What kind of reports? Static filled the channel for a long moment. Then, the kind where they find the truck but not the driver. You just be careful, Blue Jay. Blue Jay. That was my handle from 20 years ago. Nobody had called me that in a decade. Who is this? I asked, but the radio had gone dead. I looked back toward the diner. The lights were still on, but I couldn't see anyone inside anymore. The windows just showed empty booths and that slowly turning pie case. The old sedan by the dumpsters was gone too, though I hadn't heard it start or seen it leave. I climbed back into my cab and locked the doors. Every instinct I developed in 4 decades of driving told me to get out of there. I put the truck in gear and rolled toward the exit, my headlights cutting through the drizzle. In my side mirror, I watched the diner shrink behind me. Just before it disappeared completely, I saw a figure standing in the doorway. Tall, wearing what looked like a ball cap. For just a second, in the glow of the neon, it looked exactly like the missing trucker from the flyer. I didn't stop driving until I reached the Loves in Salina, 40 miles down the road. Under the bright truck stop lights, surrounded by other drivers, I finally felt safe enough to get out and check my load again. Everything was secure, but on my rear doors, someone had drawn a symbol in the mud. A circle with an X through it. I'd heard about those marks. Hobo signs, some called them. This one meant dangerous place. I washed it off with a bottle of water, but I kept that napkin from Betty's diner. Sometimes, when I can't sleep, I take it out and look at those faded blue words. Thanks for stopping by again. And I wonder if maybe I had been there before, in some life I don't remember. Or if I'm destined to stop there again, someday, when my own picture ends up on that bulletin board. 2 days from retirement, I was running electronics from Phoenix to Minneapolis when I decided to take the scenic route through northern Arizona. It was one of those clear desert nights where you can see every star, and I wanted to savor it. This was my second to last run, and I figured I'd earned the right to enjoy the view. Around midnight, I pulled into the Meteor crater rest area. It's one of those concrete and steel places built in the 70s, all sharp angles and government efficiency. A couple of vending machines hummed under fluorescent lights, and there were maybe 3 other vehicles in the lot, a minivan with out-of-state plates, a pickup truck with a camper shell, and a sedan parked way out in the shadows. I needed to stretch my legs and use the facilities, so I set my brakes and climbed down. The desert air was crisp and clean, carrying the scent of sage and something else. Something metallic that I couldn't quite place. Maybe it was just the smell of the crater itself, that ancient impact site a few miles away. Walking back from the restroom, I noticed something odd. There was a white zip tie looped around my passenger door handle. Not tight, just hanging there like someone had marked my truck. I'd heard stories about that. Criminals marking vehicles to identify easy targets or lone drivers. I cut it off with my pocket knife and tossed it in a trash can, but the sight of it left me uneasy. I was just about to climb back into my cab when I heard voices from the other side of my trailer, a man and woman talking in low, urgent tones. I couldn't make out the words, but something about their conversation sounded wrong, too intense for a casual rest stop meeting. I walked around my trailer, trying to look casual, like I was just checking my load. There they were, a young couple, maybe late 20s, standing by the pickup truck. When they saw me, they stopped talking immediately. "Evening," the man said. He had the kind of smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Nice night for driving." "Sure is," I replied, keeping my distance. The woman stepped closer. "We're having some car trouble. Our fuel pump went out. You wouldn't happen to have any tools we could borrow?" I glanced at their pickup. It was running fine. I could hear the engine idling, see the exhaust vapor in the cool air. Sounds like it's running okay to me. The man's smile faltered. It's intermittent, keeps cutting out. Something about their story didn't add up. The way they positioned themselves, blocking my view of their license plate. The way the woman kept glancing toward the shadows where that sedan was parked. The fact that they'd approached me instead of flagging down the highway patrol. I can call for help, I offered. There's a substation about 20 miles east. That's okay, the woman said quickly. We'll figure something out. They backed away then, disappearing into the darkness beyond the rest area lights. I stood there for a moment, listening to the desert wind and the distant hum of traffic on the interstate. Everything felt wrong, but I couldn't put my finger on why. Back in my cab, I tried to settle down for a few hours of sleep. I'd set my alarm for 4 a.m., planning to get back on the road before dawn. But every little sound made me jump. The tick of cooling metal, the whisper of wind around my mirrors, the distant howl of a coyote somewhere out in the darkness. Around 2 a.m., I heard footsteps on gravel. Slow, deliberate steps circling my truck. I lay perfectly still in my sleeper, listening. The steps paused at my fuel tanks, then moved toward the front of the truck. Someone was checking me out, learning the layout of my rig. Then came the sound that made my blood run cold. A child crying. Soft, heartbroken sobs coming from somewhere outside my truck. "Mama?" a small voice called. "Mama, where are you?" Every instinct told me it was a trap. I'd read about it online. Criminals using recordings of children in distress to lure drivers out of their cabs. But hearing that little voice, so scared and alone, it was almost impossible not to respond. If you're still listening, you probably enjoy stories like this. A like or a comment helps keep them alive. The crying continued for maybe 5 minutes, moving around my truck like whoever was making it was searching for their mother. Then it stopped abruptly, cut off mid-sob like someone had hit a switch. I waited another hour before I dared to look outside. The rest area was empty except for my truck. The minivan, the pickup, the sedan, all gone. But there, scattered around my truck in the gravel, were children's toys, a stuffed rabbit, a small plastic car, a coloring book with pages fluttering in the wind. I started my engine and got out of there fast. At the next truck stop, I called the highway patrol and reported what I'd seen. The trooper I spoke with didn't seem surprised. "We've had reports about that rest area," he said. "Folks using it as a base for robbery, kidnapping, worse. That crying you heard. We think it's a recording they play through a portable speaker. They use it to get drivers out of their cabs. What about the toys? Probably left them to mess with your head. Make you think there really was a kid in trouble. It's psychological warfare." I made my delivery in Minneapolis and drove straight back to the terminal. That was my next to last run, but I couldn't shake the memory of that child's voice, so realistic, so heartbreaking. Part of me still wonders if there really was a kid out there, lost and scared, while I sat in my cab doing nothing to help. But the rationale part of me knows better. In 41 years of driving, I'd learned to trust my instincts, and my instincts told me that whatever was happening at that rest area, it wasn't about helping a lost child. It was about making me into the next missing trucker on some bulletin board. My final run was supposed to be ceremonial. A light load of office supplies from Atlanta to Birmingham, just enough to make it official. After 41 years, I was going out with an easy day's drive through familiar territory. I knew every mile of I-20 between those cities, every truck stop and way station. That's why it was so strange when I saw the sign for a way station I'd never noticed before. It was just past the Alabama state line, where the highway curves through a stretch of pine forest they call Deadman's Curve. The sign was old and weathered. Commercial vehicle inspection, next right. I'd driven this route hundreds of times, but I couldn't remember ever seeing a way station there. My load was legal. I knew that without even checking. But the sign was lit up, and in Alabama, you don't ignore an open-way station. I took the exit, following a narrow access road that wound through thick woods before opening up into a small clearing. The facility looked like it had been there forever. A small brick building with a shingled roof, a single set of scales, and a few parking spaces for trucks that needed inspection. An old man in a DOT uniform stood in the doorway, clipboard in hand. I rolled onto the scales and waited for the reading. The display flashed red. Overweight. That was impossible. I'd scaled the load myself that morning. I was well under the limit on all axles. The inspector walked over to my window. He was older than me, with deep lines around his eyes and hands that shook slightly as he held his clipboard. "Gonna need you to pull around back," he said. "We'll get this sorted out." "I'm not overweight," I told him. "I scaled this load myself." He just nodded, like he'd heard it all before. "Pull around back, son. Won't take but a minute." The back of the facility was just a gravel lot surrounded by pine trees. I parked where he indicated and climbed out to wait. The air smelled like pine sap and something else. Something old and musty, like a basement that hadn't been opened in years. The inspector came around with a handheld device, supposedly to recheck my axle weights, but instead of focusing on my truck, he kept glancing at the woods around us. "You been driving long?" he asked. 41 years, I said. "This is actually my last run." Something changed in his expression. "Your last run? Well, I'll be. That's something special." He looked down at his clipboard, then back at me. "What's your name, son?" "Frank Morrison." He wrote something down, then looked up at the sky. It was getting dark, though it couldn't have been more than 4 in the afternoon. The trees seemed to press closer, their shadows reaching across the gravel lot like fingers. "Frank Morrison," he repeated. "You know, we get a lot of drivers through here on their last runs. Funny thing about last runs, they have a way of lingering." I didn't like the way he said that. "What do you mean?" Instead of answering, he pointed to a wooden bench beside the building. "Have a seat. This might take a while." The bench was old and weathered, carved with initials and names going back decades. As I sat down, I noticed that some of the carvings were recent, some looked ancient, but they all had one thing in common. They were all trucker handles and names, followed by dates. Road Dog 1987, Smokey Joe 1993, Highway Bill 2001. And at the far end of the bench, carved deep into the wood, was my own name. Frank Morrison, 2024. My hands started shaking. "What kind of place is this?" The inspector sat down beside me, his clipboard resting on his knees. "This here's a special kind of weigh station, Frank. We don't weigh cargo. We weigh other things. I want to leave. Now." "Oh, you'll leave," he said. "Everyone leaves eventually. But first, you got to understand something. 41 years on the road. That's a long time. Long enough to leave pieces of yourself scattered across every highway in America. Long enough to become more road than man." The woods around us had gone completely quiet. No birds, no insects, no wind in the trees. Even the distant sound of traffic from the interstate had faded to nothing. "See, Frank, retirement ain't as simple as turning in your keys. Not for drivers like you. The road gets into your blood, becomes part of who you are, and when you try to leave it behind—" He gestured toward the bench, toward all those carved names. "Well, sometimes it don't let go so easy." I stood up, backing toward my truck. "You're crazy. I'm getting out of here." "Go ahead," he said calmly. "But you'll be back. They always come back. The road calls to them and they can't resist. One more run, they tell themselves. Just one more." I climbed into my cab and fired up the engine. The inspector just sat there on his bench, watching me with those tired old eyes. As I pulled away, I caught a glimpse of him in my side mirror. For just a second, he looked exactly like me. 40 years from now, still sitting on that bench, still waiting for the next driver to come through on their final run. I made it back to the interstate, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed. The highway looked different somehow, more familiar than it should have, like I'd been driving it forever. My GPS showed the right route, but the miles seemed to stretch on endlessly. When I finally reached Birmingham and made my delivery, I drove straight to the terminal to turn in my keys. But as I sat in the parking lot, looking at that building where I'd worked for 4 decades, I felt something I hadn't expected. I didn't want to go inside. I didn't want to turn in those keys. The thought of never driving again, never feeling the road beneath my wheels, made me physically sick. I'm retired now, officially. I turned in my keys and collected my pension, but late at night, when I can't sleep, I find myself getting dressed and walking out to the driveway, looking for a truck that isn't there anymore. And sometimes, I swear, I can hear the distant rumble of diesel engines calling me back to the road. They say retirement is supposed to be the end of one chapter and the beginning of another, but I'm starting to think that for some of us, there is no end. There's just the road, stretching on forever, waiting for us to come back home. On my very last night as a professional truck driver, I wanted to do something I'd never done before, stay in a real motel instead of sleeping in my cab. After 4 decades of truck stop parking lots and rest area naps, I figured I'd earned one night in an actual bed. I was running empty for my final delivery in Jacksonville, heading back to the terminal in Atlanta, when I saw the sign, Blue Moon Motor Lodge, clean rooms, reasonable rates. It was one of those old-fashioned motor courts from the 50s, the kind with individual cabins arranged in a horseshoe around a gravel parking lot. The office was small and cluttered, with wood-paneled walls covered in faded photographs of the motel's glory days. Behind the desk sat a woman who looked like she'd been there since the place opened. She had steel-gray hair and sharp eyes that seemed to catalog everything about me in a single glance. "Just need a room for the night," I said. "Something where I can park my rig close by." She slid a registration card across the counter. "Room 7's at the end. You can pull right up to the door." She handed me an old-fashioned key attached to a plastic fob shaped like a crescent moon. "Rules are simple. No visitors after 10, no noise after 11, and if someone knocks on your door after midnight, don't answer." "Why not?" She just looked at me with those sharp eyes. "Because it won't be us." Room 7 was clean but dated. Chenille bedspread, wood-grain furniture, and a window air conditioner that wheezed like an old man climbing stairs. I parked my truck right outside the window where I could keep an eye on it. After 41 years of worrying about cargo thieves and vandals, old habits die hard. I took a long shower, ordered a pizza from a place that actually delivered to the motel, and settled in to watch TV. It felt strange, being in a real room with real walls instead of the narrow confines of my sleeper berth. For the first time in weeks, I started to relax. Around 11:30, I heard voices outside. A man and woman talking quietly as they walked past my window. Nothing unusual about that. Motels are full of people coming and going at all hours. But something about their conversation made me listen more carefully. "Been driving for 40 years, the man was saying. "This is his last run." "Perfect," the woman replied. "He'll be tired, emotional, easy to approach." I sat up in bed, suddenly alert. They were talking about me. But how could they know about my retirement? I hadn't mentioned it to anyone at the motel. The voices faded as they moved away from my window. I got up and peered through the curtains, but I couldn't see anyone in the dimly lit parking lot. Just my truck and a few other vehicles scattered around the horseshoe of cabins. At 12:15, someone knocked on my door. It wasn't a normal knock. Not the quick rap of someone in a hurry or the firm knock of authority. This was slow and deliberate. 3 soft taps followed by a pause. Then 3 more taps, like a code. I remembered what the desk clerk had said. If someone knocks on your door after midnight, don't answer. But curiosity got the better of me. I walked to the door and looked through the peephole. There was a woman standing outside, maybe 40 years old, wearing a business suit that looked expensive. She had dark hair and pale skin, and she was holding what looked like a clipboard. She knocked again, the same pattern. 3 taps, pause, 3 taps. "Excuse me," she called softly. "I'm from the trucking company. There's been a problem with your final paperwork." That got my attention. If there was a problem with my retirement paperwork, it could affect my pension. I reached for the door handle, then stopped. Something wasn't right. What trucking company representative would show up at a roadside motel after midnight, and how would they even know I was here? "Sir," the woman called again, "I really need to speak with you. It's about your retirement benefits." I stepped back from the door. Through the peephole, I could see her more clearly now. Her skin wasn't just pale, it was waxy, almost translucent. And her eyes were completely black, like looking into deep water at night. She knocked again, harder this time. "Sir, I know you're in there. I can hear you breathing." I hadn't made a sound. "We just need a few minutes of your time," she continued, "to discuss your transition from active driver to something else." The way she said "something else" made my skin crawl. I backed away from the door, my heart pounding. Whatever this woman was, whatever she wanted, it wasn't about paperwork. The knocking stopped. I waited, listening to the silence, hoping she'd given up and left. Then I heard footsteps moving around the side of the cabin, toward the window where my truck was parked. I crept to the window and peered out through a gap in the curtains. The woman was standing beside my truck, running her hands along the side of the cab like she was petting a large animal. As I watched, she opened the driver's door and climbed inside. My keys were in my "Hello, everyone." Before we start, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel and leave a comment with where you're from and what time you're watching. That way, YouTube will keep showing you stories just like this one. Now, let's begin.